I'm going to do a series of videos on the ISDA Master Agreement, and I figured I would start at the beginning. Every bank and broker-dealer on Wall Street uses these agreements, and so does every large hedge fund. So why do they use it? If you're trading with somebody and you have to negotiate each individual contract, it's going to be very time-consuming and very expensive. And if somebody goes bankrupt, like has did with Lehman or Bear Stearns, and you had to litigate each different agreement with different terms, it would be a nightmare. And also, if a company goes through bankruptcy, the bankruptcy judge gets to decide which contracts stay after bankruptcy and which ones get discharged. They get to cherry pick them. And you can imagine what a nightmare it would be if a broker goes through bankruptcy and they get to keep the winning trades and get rid of all the losing trades. So you have everything with a counterparty under one master agreement, and they can't pick the winning trades to keep and discard the losing trades in bankruptcy. It's all considered one contract. And so there's one amount that's owed or one amount that has to be paid. So it makes it easier to negotiate these agreements and deal with somebody in bankruptcy if, God forbid, anything goes wrong, as we saw in the great financial crisis. And the structure is a little unique. You might not see this in other contracts, but it's the way things are done. So generally, if you have a contract and you make changes to the contract, how do you keep track of those? Well, you might do a red line, but if you're dealing with thousands of contracts and hundreds of parties, this could be a nightmare. So the very clever solution that ISDA came up with is they have this master agreement, which is standardized. And then if you have changes, you make changes to something called the schedule, and that goes at the end. So there are these general terms in the master agreement, and you can flip to the end to the schedule and you'll see whatever changes they made or choices they've picked. For example, here, this is an ISDA Master Agreement for Wells Fargo, and I found this in an SEC filing. So this was in 2021, but it deals with the older ISDA Master in 1992. Now everyone uses the 2002 one, but if you have an older one in place, you might still be using it. So you have all the terms in the master agreement, and this schedule you turn to in the back, and then you'll see where it differs or where choices have been made that affect the master agreement. So for instance, there's a threshold amount referenced in the master agreement. And if you look here, it specifies that the threshold amount is 10 million. There's something else in there which talks about a credit event upon merger. So what happens if one company merges with the other? And does it apply to one party? Does it apply to both? And the provisions in the master that deal with that apply to both parties. And the automatic early termination applies to neither party. So sometimes it applies to one party and not the other. Sometimes it applies to both. And some provisions apply to one while others apply to neither. And as I said, the master agreement is very general, and the schedule will specify everything that's important that's specified between the two parties. And then you turn to the end of the contract for that. And there's also something called an annex, which is different than a schedule. Sometimes people get them confused. But the way to understand an annex is, let's say that you are opening a trading account with somebody like Introducing Brokers. Let's say that you're opening a trading account with someone like Interactive Broker. You open the account, you sign the documents, and that is the master agreement. And then you have to decide, do you want to trade stocks? Do you trade options, futures, bonds, hedge, spot stuff? And there's different forms that you have to fill out for each of these. And so you can consider that the annex, because there are specific rules and provisions that apply to each asset class. And that would be something like the annex. And there's different annexes. There's a credit support annex, which is the most common. And there's other ones that deal with different types of derivatives that you would trade. And you would have the master agreement, and then you would have that annex apply to those specific transactions. So think of your brokerage agreement like the master agreement. And if you want to trade these things, which are different products and different rules and different disclosures apply to each one, consider that like the annex, because the annex are also standardized And if you were to make changes to the contracts because you're big enough, then that would be the schedule. And you wouldn't make changes in your brokerage agreement, but hedge funds and banks and broker-dealers are pretty big, so they can specify what changes they want, and that would be in the schedule, and that goes at the end of the contract. So rather than go through a ISDA Master contract and look for where the changes are, if they were redlined like this, which would be very difficult, you just turn to the end. And because everyone has seen an ISDA Master and they're very familiar with it, the only changes that are important are here, and you can just quickly refer to them and see where they apply. And as I said, you would be trading under a master agreement, and then the schedule specifies the specific changes. And then if you do trades, you would do a confirmation. So getting back to the brokerage example, you've opened your account, you have these different options that you can trade. So if you bought a share of Apple or IBM, each of those would require a confirmation, and those would be part of the master agreement. So under the master agreement, you have the schedules and the annexes which affect the master, and then for the individual trades that you do, you have the confirmations, and you have a lot of these confirmations back and forth, but they're covered under a master netting. So if one of the parties goes bankrupt, the court will not pick and choose which transactions survive bankruptcies and which don't. They don't get to cherry pick. They're all governed under one agreement. It's called a master netting, and it's provided for in the bankruptcy code of every major country. Although when you do these ISDA agreements, it will specify New York or UK law, and that's one of the choices that you would make when you do the schedule before you start trading. So that is the very basics: the ISDA Master, the schedule, annexes, and the confirmations. And I'm going to do more videos where I'll explain different parts about the negotiation process. So just like and subscribe so you'll see these when they come out. If you're wondering who I am, my name's Pete. I'm a lawyer with 25 years experience in finance. I worked in a law firm doing mergers and acquisitions and securities. I worked for a government regulator dealing with financial derivatives. And now I still practice law and work as a consultant and a YouTuber. So if you have any specific questions about ISDA agreements and negotiations, or you have questions or things you'd like to see future videos on, just leave them in the comments. Have a great day, everyone.